One of the first things you learn when you start with learning CSS is the box model. And it looks pretty simple. You got these four nested boxes of margin, border, padding, and content. And you'd think, yeah, I get that. But for some reason, I just haven't been able to get all my elements to position properly and to nest properly. I constantly fighting it. And what I found out is there's some gotchas and just some weird things. And that's what I want to talk about today, is share with you what I learned so that you can master this beast. We're going to talk about when to use margins versus padding, what's vertical margin collapse, how to set your box sizing to border box so that things size properly, and what are some margin defaults. So let's get into it. I like to think of the box model as representing a picture frame where the frame is the border, this mat, white mat around the outside, that's the padding, and the center, the photo, is the content. And then everything outside of this picture frame is the margin. Another way to think about it is a shipping box. You've got the box as the border, the foam padding is the padding, and you got your content, whatever you're going to store inside, and everything outside of the box is your margin. Now, I also think of margin as like personal space, where it's the space outside of you, and you can just kind of push it out as you want more personal space. Just keep pushing to give yourself some more room. Now let's go over what the differences are between margin, border, padding, and content. So just remember that the margin is on the outside of this main box. And because it's on the outside, it's always transparent. It's like air. And you, the other things you can give them background images and colors and give them styling, but not the margin. And you can also auto size the width of the margin. So that's a one way to get stuff to be centered. You can figure out what the size is automatically, but just for the width, not the height. If you do auto for the height, you get 0. And then something else that's really weird that I'm going to show you is that these top and bottom, the vertical margins can collapse and get smaller than what you would expect they should be. Now, this next box, the border, the only thing that's really kind of special about it is you can style it, and you can give it like a frame effect. You know, there's different styles for this border, but you can also make it transparent, and you can't even see it. It blends in with the padding. You can't tell where this starts and stops. The padding is pretty straightforward, and what makes the content unusual is that you can nest things inside of here. So you can put other elements inside of this content. And like usually you put pictures and word, text and things like that, but it can be multi-levels. And then it will also auto size. So you can tell it to, as if you put something bigger in there, it'll grow and stretch and shrink and different things like that. So that's basically the difference between these different types of things. Now, there's two ways for the measuring, for the box sizing to work. The default way, the way that they did it originally, was when you set the height and the width, it's going to be for this inside content. And when you add padding and border, it grows outside of this original width that you gave it. Well, there's a newer way that's more popular now, and that's called the border box sizing. And that's where when you tell it the width and the height, it's for this whole thing that you control. And so all of this can be filled with a background image or pattern or color, for example. And so you can think of this as the real object. And then the margin is just kind of invisible outside. So it makes more sense to use this sizing model, the border box model, to calculate when you're setting your widths and heights. I'm going to show you some examples. So I've got 3 boxes right now. I've got the first 2 are the special border box, and the third one is the normal default content box. Now, if I turn on a border for all three of these, you see how these didn't change size. The border went in, and so the white part, the contents, actually got smaller. And on this one, the content stayed the same size, and the border was put on the outside. And I'm going to do, I'm going to add some padding. And so now this white box is still the same size. I set it for 50%. It's 50% of the width of the green. And the padding is on the outside, and it's getting bigger. It looks a lot bigger than these others. So these have stayed 50%, and only this white part is 50%. And you notice the contents, it's getting squished as the padding was in there. So think of this as like a box with padding, and your storage space inside is getting smaller. This especially is a problem when you do this at 100%. Let's see, where have I got that? Yeah, right here. So when you're trying to do something 100% here, these top two are inside of this green, and they fill it completely from side to side. Now this pink one is also the white area is 100%, but because it's got all this stuff outside of it, it's overflowing where it's supposed to go. So whenever you're trying to size things with percentages, it's much easier if you do it with the box sizing, set it to border box. Let's go back to my slides. I want to talk about vertical margin collapse. There's three situations where your margins, the vertical margins, up in the top and bottoms, can partially disappear or collapse. First one is adjacent siblings. When you've got two boxes on top of each other, when they overlap in the middle, the margins are less than what you might expect. Let me show you. So let's look at this first one. So if we look at the margins on the first one, I've got margins that go all the way around it for both of these. Let's look at them. So there's the margins, and here are margins, and the margins, this margin in between, it's shared. It's overlapping, and so it's not twice. It's half what you might expect it to be. And let's see. I'm going to make that a little bit bigger. Let's turn this off. So now I just increased this from 10 to 30, and so now, even though these overlap, let's go back. It's whichever one's the biggest is the one that counts, and the other one is just kind of ignored because it overlaps. Let me turn that off. Let me show you another example of when margins can collapse. If you have something that's completely empty, has no contents, no padding, no border, no height, it will collapse. So only half, only like either the top or the bottom, it's half as much as you would expect is actually comes into effect. And I'm going to show you an example. So down here, I actually have an element that doesn't have any content, so it has no height to it. And so if I turn just one pixel of padding on, in fact I had it the opposite, so it was already on. So now it's no height, and now I've just turned on one pixel, and the margins go into effect. So if we look at the margins, here's the margins with one pixel on, and here are the margins. So now the margin collapse. It actually overflows into the one below it, and it's ignored. So it only gets half of the only half of the margin, either the top or the bottom. It really counts. Let me show you another example. A third way that you can get margin collapse is when you have a child inside of a parent, and it can overflow outside of the parent. So let's look back at my example again. Yeah, this one's probably the best one. So right now, if we look at the margins here, I've got margins above and margins below. I'm going to make that bigger. I'm going to make that 30. And so now, notice that the margin, it pushed, it didn't push it, there's no margin within the green. So the parent is the green. It didn't put the margin at the beginning. It overflowed into the outside, and the margin pushed the green box down. All of these got pushed down. So let me turn that back off. And so now when I give it a smaller margin for this blue box, everything is pulled up. And that's because the parent-child margin collapse is what happens. Let's see. Something else that I want to talk about is default margins. You may not realize it, but there's a whole bunch of common elements that are given default margins by the browsers. And so they'll have usually left and right, or excuse me, top and bottom margins that you don't set, that are set for you. And quite often I will just set these to 0 just so that they don't surprise me. And here's one that's got padding is set. So the takeaways, I want you to remember that padding is on the inside, margins are on the outside. You can have vertical margins collapsing, so pay attention to that and look for it. And then to take care of your box sizing, here's a safe way to be able to change it globally for everything, and to have it not have side effects on any libraries and stuff that you might be using. So I hope that's helpful.